Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Hello.
Hey, how are you?
Thank you for joining us. So I'm going to do a really brief introduction to all of our panelists and then just get straight into it. So we've got Laila Mckenzie. Laila is the founder and director of music events business Parallel Dimensions. Laila worked for, I think it's 18 years, she said, in the club music events industry and now leads a team of Black, Asian and minority ethnic professionals. Neil Maggs. Neil is a journalist and filmmaker known for challenging documentaries, radio, film, and also podcast Bristol Unpacked, and also his strong views on Bristol and the local media here as well. Mo Ali is a poet, spoken word artist, entrepreneur, philosopher, and also a recent maths graduate. And Mel Rodrigues is the director of TEDx Bristol, and the founder of Britty Talent. So that's a talent agency that is focused purely on getting people in the sort of outside of the mainstream. So hi everyone and welcome and thanks for joining us.
Hello.
Hiya. I'm gonna start off by asking, sort of leading on from a theme that came up in the short film, if I can get my words out, that just asking each of you to tell me a bit about your experiences and some of the challenges that you think are faced by people that want to forge a career in creative industries. Laila, can I go to you first, please?
Hi. Hello, guys. Yeah, so I think that back in the day, it used to be a lot easier to break through the barriers to entry within the creative industry. I don't know about every part of the creative industry, but I can speak for what I know of, and that's music and the club world. You know, I think the reasons why this was is that the scene was much more open. Then it was something that was very new. It was coming about. I think, you know, as things came through just at the tail end of the 80s and the start of the 90s, from what I've heard from older mentors, the scene was very much about breaking through an oppressive time, pretty much like we're having now. And a lot of people came together that wouldn't have normally have worked together and been brought together through the music, through the wanting to release and express themselves. And I just think that this made it, you know, very much open for all. I think as time's got on and it became much more a business, there's been a lot more money involved, you know, more corporates have got involved. I think this has then changed and started bringing up barriers to entry. One being, you know, which I've personally experienced throughout my career, socio-economic barriers where, you know, people might have not got enough money to start out, say as a promoter, to book artists. Artist fees have inflated so much. People wanting, you know, say like deposits on venues and things like that. So that would kind of cancel out a whole group of people that, you know, might not be as fortunate when it comes to finances as others. So yeah, I think that that's a really big thing, that this has now become, as well as a creative industry for expression, you know, capitalism took over a lot within this industry. And
sorry Laila.
Yeah.
So really, instead of going forward, we've kind of gone backwards in some ways in terms of barriers to entry then. Mel, can I go to you next? What are some of your experiences, and do you agree, and do you feel that those barriers have got worse or better?
I think maybe some barriers have come in and some have actually been broken down a bit. I think it's probably a bit more of a complex picture from the perspective that I've got from the TV industry. So that's where, you know, I've spent the last 20 years of my life kind of working in mostly kind of factual production and working with other medium as well and digital work, but mostly in the TV industry. And I think what I experienced when I first started working in TV was it was a very middle class and white industry. It still is in many ways, but there were opportunities for lots of people to come in, but it was still kind of, you know, so 12 to 15 years ago, I was one of very few female and mixed heritage directors making programs, and the majority of people who were not, I guess, white and middle class were maybe in more kind of administrative or junior roles, and that has massively changed. And I've seen, you know, there's been some incredible work, and this is like, you know, the BBC, Channel 4, all of the networks, I think, you know, have got much better representation now, but I still think that, you know, as Laila kind of alluded to, there's lots of different types of barriers, and I still think one of the really tough ones to crack is this access to the industry if you're someone who does not have money, connections, a driving license, a car, so that you can get to work, so that you can do last minute gigs, access to kind of, I guess, you know, take the entry roles, which are often low paid or unpaid. We heard a bit about that in one of the films. I think that it's this is, and I don't want to kind of, you know, ignore the fact that I think there's been lots of brilliant work that has been done to try and unpick some of these barriers. So I don't think that it's a case of things standing still, but these barriers are all intersecting and quite kind of pernicious. You chip away at one and then another one kind of comes up, and I definitely feel right now with COVID, we are in this moment of actually potentially some barriers getting worse, because actually visibility of people, access to decision makers could get harder because we cannot network together in the way that we might have on the ground. But I'm also really hopeful that actually COVID is going to force us to be much better at connecting, as we are now today digitally, enabling people to have conversations who maybe wouldn't have access to decision makers and people who are in positions of authority before. So there is this opportunity to use COVID actually as a force of good to smash away at some other of these barriers. So I feel it's a really mixed picture. The reason that I launched Gritty Talent at the beginning of this year, so I had no idea the pandemic was going to happen, by the way, but I knew that I wanted to do talent in the digital space. I knew that the people that I wanted to work with were already using YouTube, TikTok, Messenger. They were already connecting in groups elsewhere, and people in traditional media were not connecting with them. So I did not have a kind of a crystal ball, but I had a feeling that we needed to shift the way we do the talent connecting in the way that we help people get those onward steps. So I hope that we can use this moment now to just push back at some of those things that are still there, particularly the kind of cultural and financial barriers.
Thanks, Mel. Yeah, so it's kind of, it's the structural things and it's the practical things, and understanding there's a whole complex web of different barriers. Mo, can I go to you and ask for your thoughts and your experiences on trying to get a foot in the door, really?
Yeah, so I guess I'm more of the entry side now. I'm trying to get into the industry, and I pretty much will echo everything Mel and Laila said so far, and just taking a bit from both of them. And with regards to Laila first, and she mentioned funding. From my personal experience, that's been one of the major ones. But also to give you some context behind it, I think people that are from a particular background, for example, BAME, are more disadvantaged when it comes to actually receiving funding to do the arts. For example, the last bid that I put in was a very small amount, and it was and I actually said it would be a year project. I was going to deliver a year project's worth, and in fact I needed to get more funding to do it. But the feedback that I got was, the feedback that I got back was essentially, and the money that I asked for was too much for what the work was worth. And although in my opinion, it was completely the opposite. And I think the reason for that is because of the work that I was doing. I felt undervalued, or it felt that part of the work I was doing was going out into communities that are less deprived and working with them and doing film in that area. And I felt like if perhaps I was targeting a different area or a different community, it might have been valued from a different light or perspective. So I think, yeah, so that's one of the personal issues that I face, is, for example, with funding. And another one, to sort of echo what Mel said there, is with regards to connections and who you know, and I guess support. For example, when I was younger, I think everybody went through a stage of trying to become a rapper. I'm not that person anymore, but there was a point. But I mean, even the people all around me, they all wanted to be some sort of artist in my community. But if you ask them, you know, how you would become an artist from that perspective, and the only thing they knew was you have to get a record deal. But they didn't know how you bridge the gap, and nor did they know, or I knew, where I could go to get support to sort of bridge that gap, and where you could go to sort of help, you know, develop your talent. And there wasn't that support. And if there is that support, then they weren't reaching out to us in those areas. So yeah, those are the two things I'll end on for now.
Thanks, Mo. That's really interesting, especially what you said about funding, because I feel like there's a lot at the moment of talk about wanting to support these sort of grassroots projects, but in your experience, actually, when it comes down to it, the funding isn't there, which is perhaps why not enough of this is happening. Neil, can I ask you your experiences and thoughts on some of the barriers?
Yeah, I guess I'll speak from a media perspective, and I'm somebody who came into the media kind of midlife, so I sort of changed career. I was involved in community development, sport development before, where there are quite similar barriers and similar kind of issues, that it was kind of, the industry was sort of dominated by a certain sort of strata. And I think that there's a few things to pick up on what other people said. I think the most point around networking is really key. I think the media, if we're really honest, is one of the most cronyist kind of industries going. And it is a lot about who you know, whether you're able to kind of network, you're invited to these kind of events and stuff like that. And I think that I've seen people have a very quick transition based on who they know, not necessarily because of ability. So I think, obviously, by definition, if you're somebody that comes from a different background, you may be from a working class background like myself, or from a BME background like Mo, where you maybe don't have that kind of those relationships, so you kind of miss out. So I think there's something that we need to, I guess there's two approaches to that. You broaden those networking spaces to a wider range of people, which has happened in some quarters in Bristol, or you challenge that culture and you try and make it more accessible and more equality of opportunity. You have an intention to give a broader base of people, jobs in the industry. That's one thing for me. The other thing I think is entry levels. I think entry levels, specifically to journalism, to the media, are sometimes more harder than they need to be. I think the irony being that at the moment the industry is going through this whole sense of trying to change this, yet to a certain degree some of those entry level systems still exist. There's been some really good examples, which I think we'll go on to talk about, which are really trying admirably to try and change that. So that's welcome. My sense at the moment, which underpins all this conversation, actually isn't just about diversity, it's why this is important. And I'm not quite sure everyone quite gets why that is. I mean, I think a lot of TV execs or radio producers kind of know, oh my God, we need more BME people, we need more trans people, we need disabled, but why? Let's unpick why. And it's not just because it's a quota and just because it's a reflective of representation. It's because it makes fundamentally better journalism. It gives you more broader stories. It gives you great attraction to those communities. It gives you authenticity. It gives you able to make decisions which are key. I mean, we've seen something recently on BBC Points West where which caused a national kind of scandal where a presenter said the N-word, and it caused a huge furore. Had there been a producer that was black, I guarantee you that would not have even come to that stage. So we have a place at the moment where the diversity push is very much in front of the camera in TV. Mel said about the improvements of the BBC. At the moment, there's 26% on-screen BME presenters in the BBC, and there's 3.6% of people that make programmes. That's the real issue, is who is making programmes, who is making who has decision-making capacity. And then you'll see a radical shift in how we do things. But I think for me, that's where the real change needs to happen, is where people have power. And at the moment, that's what we're not quite getting right. But, but it's a journey. I think it's certainly better in our industry than it was 10, 20 years ago, definitely.
Thanks, Neil. I think you make a really important point as well, in that we talk about diversity, we talk about representation. We've chosen to call this event How We Make the Industries More Inclusive, because it is that not tokenistic. It's actually broadening so that everybody, you know, regardless of background, regardless of their circumstances, does have a voice and does have a say right sort of through the whole spectrum, not just a kind of an entry level or a presenting level, which even then it still needs to improve a lot. Thank you. Now, I don't want to focus on the negatives, but I am going to ask, because there is, especially now, a lot of talk about how we can improve things and that sort of thing. But where so far not a lot has changed. I speak to a lot of people who say they have been having these conversations for the last 20, 30 years. Things haven't changed enough. So what's going wrong? What are organisations not doing quite right? I don't know who to go to first. Does anyone want to jump in?
I'll just on like the point where Neil left off on, which is about decision makers and power. And I think that part of the reason that things have gone wrong is because a lot of the schemes that have existed over the last 20 to 30 years, and there have been loads of them, and I've been part of them. You know, I used to run the Digital Cities project for the BBC, and we did lots of talent pipeline events. My personal view is that the things that parachute in, and you have like a week or a day, and you introduce people to the industry, and they get excited, and they meet people, and they're great, and they get, you know, all this kind of potential opportunity dangled. I think there's been a lot of events and initiatives which dangle the carrot, and then the onward trajectory is really unclear. So people get to kind of get a taste of how interesting this industry is, and maybe they even get their first job. But beyond that, the talent retention and the kind of your next steps are really frustrated by, again, the barriers that still exist. So if you've had your first job as a runner and it was a 6-week contract and you had an amazing time, and it ends and you don't know who to talk to and it's hard to get your next job and you need to make money, you're going to go and get a different job somewhere else because you can't wait for your next TV contract to happen. In the meantime, someone who's more networked, who's more financially affluent, and maybe has, you know, much more ability to spot the opportunities, might be able to then carry on doing the low paid work and climb the ladder sooner, because actually they've been able to hang out in that space and wait, even though it's been underpaid and haphazard. So, you know, this is the problem with it's not just TV. I think creative industry, and it's not the only industry in this country, but they are gig economies predominantly. It's freelance contracts, it's short-term gigs, it's project by project basis. So the diversity and inclusivity initiatives who introduce people at entry level and then don't help them find their next steps mean that you get people at the very bottom of the ladder who then feel quite disenfranchised. Neil's got his hand raised.
I was going to say, all right.
Yeah, so just on that note of what I think's gone wrong, it is having this longer vision. So the reason that we don't have a much wider spectrum of people in management roles now is because in the last 10 to 15, 20 years, people dropped out along the way. I'm an example of someone who carried on, but I left the BBC actually because I didn't think that a management role there, I could get the work done that I wanted to do. So, you know.
Thank you, Mel. I'm going to go on to Neil because he had his hand up there.
Yeah, I'll only be quick just to respond to Mel's point. No, I think that's right. It's about you know, a sustainable career, and I think that a lot of you know, across the breadth of diversity, there is economics that underpin this. In the media used to be a unionised working class kind of career choice for people, whereas now, because as you say, it's very much based on the gig economy or based on you know, going in for work experience or unpaid work, low paid work. And, you know, if you are somebody that has to pay rent or somebody that doesn't have a kind of maybe family or parents that can kind of support you through that process, you may well drop out. And I think you're right, that may be one reason why people don't, you know, come all the way through into those management positions. But that's also because you've only got to go into some spaces, you know, not just in the BBC, but in Bristol and in London for the mainstream media, and you will see some of the same people there in management that have been there for 25 years. So actually, unless people give up the seat, those jobs aren't available. So it's also that. I mean, for me, I used to work for the City Council in the sport development team, and you've got people in the Parks Department, as great as they are, they've been there for 30, 40 years in management. They're only in management by length of service. You know, and that's kind of what happens in the media a bit. So anyone with any real innovation or creativity has enough of that and just jumps ship and does her own thing. Yeah.
Thanks, Neil. Laila, you also had your hands up.
Yeah, I mean, going back to what Neil said originally, the first time we spoke, definitely there's not enough people from the groups that, you know, the industry saying that it wants to include, sat in management positions, in higher management positions. And how do we, you know, want to lead change within the industry if the people that, you know, we're trying to include aren't having a say in how that change is going to actually be led. I've seen a lot of initiatives start since, especially since the Black Lives Matter movement within the music industry, within events, within clubs, and everybody is, sorry, can you hear the background noise? Whole entourage of police, sorry. Yeah, so, you know, there's a lot of initiatives out there at the moment within the music industry, and it's calling for, you know, artists from different kinds of backgrounds to come forward, promoters, this, that. But a lot of these kind of like labels, brands, clubs, all the different moving parts of our industry have a very, very disproportionate amount of these people actually sat on the management board, on the committees, on, you know, every kind of part of the structure which will be responsible for leading on the change. You know, another thing that I've kind of noticed a lot of as well, what I feel, going back to the original question, what is, you know, it's not that it's negative, but I think we have just got to, if we're going to address these inequalities that we've got, we really do need to look at where we're going wrong, you know, as an industry. So I don't feel that talking about this is negative. I think it's actually positive. You know, but in terms of kind of like lineups, I think there's a real disproportionate amount of black and brown artists to white artists on lineups. Especially a lot of the music, what is put on these lineups is of black origin. So I've never been able to understand why, you know, why have we not got people representing the music from, you know, from who originated it.
Yeah. So there's a real disconnect there between the people that are sort of running these, well, whatever it is, events, initiatives, and the people that they're trying to reach.
Yeah.
Thanks, Laila. I'm going to move on to Mo. What are your thoughts on this, Mo?
Yeah, just I guess carry on a little bit from that, and also looking at it slightly from a different perspective, from seeing how the managers or somebody who's already in that position of influence or power can, when they're recruiting people, or their notion of excellence. And this is actually something that I got from Ziggy from Bristol Beacon, and he pointed out this study to me where it showed that the concept of excellence is actually something that we have to relook at and consider again. And this also comes back from the Arts Council and their funding that they give out. But I'll come back to that in a second. But the problem is sometimes is the concept of excellence or good quality. There's an issue around that because people associate that with a certain type of language, with a certain type of background and a certain type of demographic. So if you don't necessarily fit under that, you might not consider yourself or your art as excellent. So for example, the study that showed that in certain areas, they would, I think 64% would consider themselves creative. But if you was to ask them, well, do you consider that particular art as excellent? And the answer was no. And even lower, consider themselves as an expert in that field or in that particular art, although they would definitely be experts in that particular art. So there's this. So because of that, there's this disconnect between the people from a certain background and what would be considered as mainstream arts or mainstream excellent. And what's actually interesting is if you look at it from an audience perspective, the audience enjoy both just the same. So excellence needs to be contextualized because it's on experiential sort of level. And somebody who goes to watch a quote unquote excellent standard of ballet or theater, and they might enjoy that just as much as they would go down to the local, you know, slam sort of poetry night. And it's from, you know, their experience point of view from an audience perspective is just as, you know, just as equal. But if you was to ask a certain group of people, do you consider that art excellent or not? They would say no. And I think that's actually a problem from the employer side. They need to.
Yes, it's that perception, and also certain demographics perhaps having the confidence to go into those mainstream spaces just because traditionally that's where they've been. Right, I've told that we've got 5 minutes left to go. This has flown by. So Mel, I know you had your hands up, and I want to make sure I give everyone an opportunity to give a bit of an insight into some of the initiatives that are bucking the trend, organisations that are bucking the trend, and things that we would change. So Mel, I'll go to you first, if that's all right. Also, just a reminder to anyone in the audience, if you do want to send questions, there's 5 minutes left to send them for the panel discussion. Thank you.
Oh man, I've got so much to say. I just wanted to say to Mo, I really appreciate your point there about what people consider as brilliant and excellent. And I think sadly as a society, we're only just waking up to the diversity of excellence. And this is coming from someone who was a Brummie. I had a Brummie accent for a very long time, but I lost it because I didn't quite fit for the first 10 years of my career until I sounded a bit posher. So anyway, sorry, I'm answering a question now. So examples of excellence. So I've recently worked with Rising Arts Agency. They're doing incredible work with all kinds of people across our city, people from lots of different backgrounds to create lots of different types of art, digital, visual, real. I don't know if anyone saw the Whose Future campaign across 370 billboards in Bristol in the last month during lockdown, but it was incredible, canny use of both the fact that there was billboard space and there were lots of people really chomping at the bit to create imaginative art around both the inequalities that the pandemic had thrown open, but also the Black Lives Matter movement rising up. So I think they're doing incredible work, and I think that they plus organisations like Babasa, you know, Creative Youth Network in the city. There's lots and lots of organisations who are in touch with people and are real. And I think that one of the conversations I've been having with people in TV is about language and semantics and how you describe jobs, and what skills you ask for and what language you use and how you describe diversity. So if you do a tweet and you say, we're looking for a BAME filmmaker, or we're looking for a BAME person to be on our project, it immediately feels like quite a tokenistic diversity hire. So my top tip is to look at the organisations who are doing work with lots of different people from across the spectrum of areas which we would say might be underrepresented. And it's not just to do with ethnicity or race, but obviously that's a really hot topic right now. But look at the language that the grassroots groups are using, because it's the language that people feel empowered by and comfortable with. I think that those organisations in particular get the messaging right. So I would urge people to support them and follow what they do.
Thank you, Mel. Laila, you were nodding away there. Do you agree with some of those points?
Totally agree with Mel. I've been in discussions with a drum and bass record label, Hospital Records, and they have really been trying hard to diversify their record label, diversify their lineups, because they put events on, and they come under fire quite a lot, despite their efforts, sometimes because of the language that's being used to describe including people. I think there needs to be a real education on what people feel comfortable with, like Mel said, and what people don't feel comfortable with. And I do feel that that goes very much back to what I was originally saying, that if there is more of the people that we're trying to include sat on the management board, I think Neil mentioned that as well at some stage, about the use of the N-word being used on TV. I think if we have the people involved on the board who we're trying to say we want to include, we're going to be able to make people feel much more comfortable with, you know, actually being included. So yeah, I just totally agree with what Mel said, and I've really come across that myself as well. And as a person of mixed heritage, you know, I can really see it's like people never know what to say, you know, and everyone's trying, but who do we go for this education to? And I think that is going to be the people that we want to include.
Thank you, Laila. Right, I'm going to go swiftly on to Mo and Neil. So Mo first, so your thoughts and also what you would change.
Sorry, repeat that question very briefly.
So your thoughts on any examples of initiatives that are going well, and what would you change if you could just change something overnight to make creative industries more inclusive? We've got 1 minute to go, so if I can ask you to keep it pretty brief, and then we'll go on to
I think Mel already named a bunch of really good organizations. I would add Bristol Beacon to that. I think they're in this, you know, in the stages of really trying to actually do some genuine change moving forward. And in terms of what I would change, or what I would look at public funding. And the studies show that there's a real correlation between public funding and the risks that an artist or companies can take as a result of that public funding. And if they could diversify their talent, and if they can take risk with new talent and things of that nature. So I would look at public funding and how that is actually genuinely used, and make sure that that is used in an effective way that would make people more inclusive.
Thank you, Mo. Neil.
In the context of Bristol, I think there's two things. There's the kind of mainstream, and I would say the golden inner ring, and then there's the outer ring of the city, different communities in Bristol. And I think that you know, you've got some organisations doing some amazing stuff kind of centrally, and you've got some brilliant organisations that are doing stuff in a kind of grassroots sense, cables and cameras, Shunk Films, as you said about Babassa. You've got, you know, there's BCFM, Ujima. They do great stuff, and then you get to the mainstream. And I think that what we need to try and find is some bridging organisations. So we've got Channel 4 here now in Bristol, haven't we? So you know, to leap from just kind of making some online or local stuff to Channel 4 is quite a big leap. So I think there's a piece of work to do around how we can support and mentor individuals like Mel's doing. You know, that may be individual talent, or actually supporting local organisations to set up their own production companies. You know, we've got an example of Black Wave that with Michael Jenkins and Amina Fomi that's now making stuff in the city. Examples and models like that, because it is a bit of a leap. So, you know, my background in community development would be about, you know, if you want talking about excellence, as Mo was saying, how do you get somebody that has talent, has a vision, and how do you bring them through? And the second point has to be, I think we need to start looking at senior managers with transferable skills that aren't from the media, that can come in. It happens in other industries, that can come in, make decisions, have an understanding and expertise in issues of diversity, can quickly and swiftly make a change, I think.
So we're shaking things up from the top down. And also, I guess a lot of this is about the kind of the disconnect, the bridging, and that's potentially making roles right there that could be filled by people with loads of experience. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm sorry that has flown by. That was a quick half an hour. I think we've gone slightly over, but thank you to all of the panelists who joined us. Really, really grateful.